Now, if you've been watching someone slowly decline, they're still breathing, they're still physically here, and you find yourself maybe crying on the way home or lying awake in your bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, imagining what your life is going to be like without them, you are normal. You're experiencing something called anticipatory grief. And here's the hardest part about finding any type of support for this portion of the process, because nobody has ever prepared you for this. There's no rule book, there's no neighbor showing up with warm food at your front door. And yet the loss that you're experiencing is already happening inside of you. And stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand what's happening to your body, why it feels so overwhelming, and what you can actually do to start finding some relief right now. Now, anticipatory grief is grief that begins before the loss actually occurs. It's what you're feeling you're watching when you're watching someone or something that you love moving into an ending that you can't stop. And most people will associate anticipatory grief exclusively with terminal illness, but it goes much further than that. And I've lived it. I want to share something personal with you because I think that my story may hit home. When my mother's cancer returned and we were told it was terminal, I knew that I had to come to terms with what was happening before she passed. Now, as a faster EFT practitioner, I had already helped many clients manage this kind of pain, this process, or this portion of the grief process. So I understood something that most people don't. So I knew I had to work with my own mindset immediately, not after she had passed. So what I did is I walked myself through the process that I walk my clients through. It's something called future pacing, which I'm going to explain in a moment because it really helped me. I was losing my mother in slow motion, and I wanted to mentally run ahead and play out every worst case scenario. What would the end look like? What would I experience? What would she be going through? What is she going to be experiencing? And how am I going to hold it all together for my dad and my other siblings? So instead of letting all these stories consume me, I worked through every single one of them. I knew how to neutralize the emotional charge before those moments arrived. And when the time did come, I was able to stay calm and present. I had clarity when my family needed me most, especially my dad. And that in itself was a gift that I wouldn't have had otherwise if I had not worked on myself. And a couple years before that, my daughter was facing the loss of her dog due to an inoperable abdominal tumor. She knew what was coming, and all the what if scenarios were playing like a loop in her mind. She was overwhelmed, she was scared, and she was very convinced that she would not be able to handle it. So I walked her through that same future pacing process, and we neutralized all that overwhelm together. Now, ironically, 5 months later, she did lose that dog, and she had to put down a second dog that very same day to failing health. Two dogs, one day. That would be unbearable for most people, but because we'd already done the work ahead of time, she was able to move through it with steadiness and clarity that surprised even her. But here's what most people don't realize. Anticipatory grief isn't only about preparing for the death of a loved one, though that's often where it hits the hardest. It shows up anywhere there's a fear of unwanted change in your life. The diagnosis that shifts everything, the job that's disappearing, the relationship that is slowly unraveling right before your eyes. You might have a child leaving for college and the identity that leaves with them, the income that you're not sure if you can replace, the move that pulls you away from everything that's familiar to you right now. Anywhere your mind has latched onto a future that you didn't ask for, that's where anticipatory grief lives. So if you've been telling yourself that you shouldn't feel this emotional, that nothing really has even happened yet, I want you to hear this very clearly. What you're feeling, it's real. It already has a name. And you're not alone in this. So many people go through these same feelings, this same process. So here's where things get interesting. And this is usually the part that tends to shift everything for people when they hear it. Your body does not know the difference between what's happening right now and what you're vividly imagining about the future. This is just neuroscience. When you close your eyes and you picture the empty chair at the dinner table, your nervous system responds as if that loss is happening in this moment. Your heart rate might shift. Your cortisol will spike. Your breathing changes. Your body will be fully living in a future that hasn't even arrived yet. And this is what makes anticipatory grief so utterly exhausting. You're not doing this once, you're doing it on loop. Every quiet moment, every drive home, every time the phone rings and your stomach drops, your nervous system, it is stuck in what I call storm warning mode. It's scanning constantly, hyper vigilant, waiting for the worst, and it really never gets to rest. Now, if you're in the world of palliative care or hospice, you already know this feeling. It is witnessing the slow goodbye that nobody around you fully sees. And if your particular situation has nothing to do with a medical setting, that same nervous system response is running the show. So by the time the actual loss arrives, many people are already completely depleted and exhausted, already running on empty. You've been carrying something invisible, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, and the world around you has absolutely no idea what you're experiencing. And there's something that I want to mention here that almost nobody talks about in the grief space. There are actually two things happening inside of you simultaneously, and most people are blending them into one overwhelming experience, which is a huge part of why this feels so impossible to manage. Our culture has a very specific template for grief and loss. Something happens, people show up, you mourn, you move forward. But with anticipatory grief, it doesn't fit that template. And that's where the isolation begins. There's no funeral, there's no visible loss, there's not a moment where the world officially recognizes and validates what you're going through. And people around you, sometimes they just don't know what to say. And they will say things like, well, at least you still have them, or just try to be positive, be strong. And they absolutely mean well, but those words can leave you feeling like what you're experiencing isn't legitimate, like your grief needs to wait its turn before it's allowed to fully exist. And then there's guilt. Just notice what comes up in your body when you hear this sentence. I'm grieving someone who's still alive. Now, for most people, it just brings this quiet rush of shame. I mean, what kind of person grieves someone who hasn't left yet? You might be asking yourself, what does that say about me? And I want to answer that directly. What it says is that you love them very deeply, and that's all that it says. But here's where things might get uncomfortable, because underneath the grief, there's usually something else running entirely, something most people haven't been taught to recognize, and that's fear. The grief belongs to the coming loss, and that part is completely real and valid. But underneath it, there's almost always this second layer, the stories your mind is telling you about how you're going to survive what's coming. That's exactly what I went through. Things like, I don't know if I'm going to be okay without them, or I don't know if I can handle this, or when this ends, part of me is going to end with it. I'll never be the same. I have to prepare for the worst. So it doesn't destroy me when it actually comes. Now, those things aren't grief, those are fear, and they're two totally different things. Now, most people sitting in anticipatory grief are carrying both of those, the weight of what's coming and the terror of what they believe it will mean about them and their future. It's all tangled together so tightly that it feels like one big thing. And nobody has ever given them a way to separate the two. So let me bring this home for you because this is where the real work begins. In my work as a faster EFT practitioner, I've sat with many people in exactly this space, the in between, the waiting, the bracing. And what I've come to understand is this: you are not grieving the future. You are grieving the pictures your mind is creating about the future. And this matters more than anything else I could say to you today. Your emotions, as real and as overwhelming as they feel, are being generated by images, by meanings, by the internal stories your mind has constructed about this loss, what it's going to mean for your safety, for your identity, and your life going forward. And here's why that changes everything. See, you cannot control what's coming, but you can absolutely change what your mind is doing right now while you wait, while you're sitting in the gap. And that's what I call this process, sitting in the gap. You're at point A, point B is the end. And in the gap in between is where all the stress and tension lies. So this is where that future pacing that I talked about earlier comes in. And I want to explain what that actually means because it's the process that made the biggest difference for me, for my daughter, and for the clients that I've worked with that are in this situation. Future pacing is exactly what it sounds like. You walk yourself into the future scenarios that your mind is already concocting or creating. But instead of letting them terrorize you, you process them. You meet the emotional charge of each and every one, and you neutralize it before it actually arrives. So you're not pretending that the hard thing isn't coming. You're actually removing the fear layer so that when it does come, you can actually be present for it instead of falling apart. And that's what it did for me. So let's think about it this way. So every time you mentally rehearse the empty house, the worst case outcome, the funeral you haven't even attended yet, you are practicing for something that hasn't happened and your body is suffering through it in real time. So future pacing takes those same mental rehearsals and transforms them from something that depletes you into something that actually prepares you. And here's the reframe that I come back to again and again in my practice. So instead of practicing their death, instead of practicing the end, I want you to start practicing loving them while they're still here. What can you say today? What can you appreciate today? What memories can you make today? What conversations, maybe the ones that you've been putting off, can you actually have while there's still time? That's what my mom and I did. Because spending months grieving someone who is still alive means missing months of really important moments with them. And your nervous system pays the price for all that. Now, I want to be really clear about something. I'm not asking you to push the grief away or force your way through this situation with toxic positivity. That in itself is not healing. That is what I call suppression, and your body will find another way to hold it inside. So what I am saying is that the suffering that comes from the fear stories, the I won't survive it, the thought of my life is over when this happens. That layer of pain is, that's not mandatory. It feels mandatory, but it isn't. That's exactly what I help people work through, not by bypassing the grief, identifying and dissolving that fear layer right underneath it. All the mental constructions, the rehearsals attached to the loss, the beliefs running just underneath the surface of your awareness. Because when those pieces start to lose their emotional charge, what's left is something completely different. So what's left is love, it's presence, and it's the ability to be actually with the person or the situation that's in front of you, rather than spending every single day buried in a future that has not even come yet. That is a very different way to move through this process. And that kind of emotional healing is absolutely possible for you. Now, if any of this hit home for you, if you recognized yourself somewhere in this video, I want you to know that you don't have to manage this alone if you don't want to. Whether you're sitting with anticipatory grief around a loved one's illness, maybe it's even a diagnosis of your own. Maybe your job is ending. Maybe your relationship is shifting in a direction that you're not happy with, or a life that's changing in ways that you didn't choose. It's all the unwanted changes in life. If your nervous system has been locked into storm warning mode, there is a real specific work that we can do together. Now, I offer a free consultation. The link will be in the description below. It lasts 30 to 60 minutes. What we do is we usually talk about where you are, what you're carrying, and whether working together makes sense for your specific situation, and really where you want to go with everything. Because you know what? You've been bracing for impact long enough. And I'll see you in the next one.